Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Research Roadshow and the fourth edition of The Italian Job. I hope you're all doing well tonight, and thank you for tuning in. I was going to start the night off talking about the Italian miracle that came between 1948 roughly and 1970, the boom in economic growth, but I opted instead to talk a little bit about the end of the Second War and the transition between 1946 and 1955, roughly, because that has bearing on what we're seeing today on many fronts, with the Eugene Yu case, with the goings on in Amsterdam and Rotterdam, and with the World Bank, the Bank of International Settlements, and a few other figures that Catherine Austin Fitts brought up 2 weeks ago. Okay, so I'm going to, by the way, I started off again with the Inno Brigate Sassari, a Sardinian battle hymn from the First War, because it's one of my favorite, and this is a real war. There are very few bullets and hand grenades as yet, but there are very real victims, especially the cancer victims, the victims of child abuse. I was involved in handling several child abuse cases in Italy, and now because of COVID and men especially are at home more, and there's just more pressure on the family, the number of child abuse cases is through the roof. So the forces that we're fighting against, like Mary from Arizona said, we are fighting against forces of physical, but even more so metaphysical forces. If you believe in, well, let's say it's a real fight between good and evil. Okay, so we have a war with very real victims, and for now, it's mostly a psychological war and a war of information. Let's go to our first graphic. All right. Again, on the cover slide today was the CA-60 Caproni, a hydroplane that was designed to carry 100 passengers, because that was going to be the ticket between the two wars. That was going to be the ticket to an ulterior boom in Italy's economy, was the ability to transport merchandise and passengers along the 6,000 kilometers of coastline. So why is this so important? The end of the Second War. Well, let's go back for a minute to the start of back to 1922 and the rise of fascism. What does fascism stand for? The fascis, as I explained in the previous two episodes, stands for stronger together. Where have we heard that before? So the many kingdoms, the 19 or so kingdoms and princedoms being united between 1948 and 1862, were supposed to be stronger in order to combat physically and economically with the French, with the Austro-Hungarian, the Ottoman Empire, and so forth. But it didn't work out quite that way. After the First World War, people were really suffering, and they're starting to grumble. Hey, how come we were promised that if we gave our sons in the fight for the unification, that things are going to go great for us? They're not going so great. So when do things start to go great? Now, in every kingdom and dukedom since 1750, there has been a proto-fascist element. Okay, there's very, very few exceptions, and that goes from the tip of Scotland to basically to Turkey and around the Mediterranean. The proto-fascist element is always there, but obviously between the end of the First War in 1922, this element starts to come out and gets the upper hand, and the then king of Italy, Vittorio Emanuele III, is hard pressed to stand up against it. I'm sorry. Let me bring up. Okay, there he is. I finally found the right folder. I have a slight difficulty with folder management. All right, so there you see, I hope. There's Vittorio Emanuele III, and he's looking good there. I think he's around 25 at this time. And remember, he is called the Soldier King because he's one of the few men in recent European history that has fought in both two wars, First World War and the Second World War. And he fought a little bit in the First War, and the Second War not so much. But in 1922, the fascist element is on the rise, as it is in many parts of Europe, but it's especially strong in Italy because the country is so young, and the amalgamation, let's say, of all the different countries and provinces into one. It's kind of like running a three-legged race. If any of you have run a three-legged race, you know how difficult it is to get to the finish line and beat your competitors. This amalgamation of 18 or 19 different countries is like a 19-legged race, right? So the people are very angry about how things are going, and so Vittorio Emanuele III had very little possibility of standing up. He wasn't that old yet. He didn't have many strong allies in either faction. But here's the key point: is that here's how it relates to today. Is that he had a lot of difficulty in finding someone he could trust. And the two people that he trusted the most just so happened to have spent a lot of time, respectively, in Geneva and Zurich. Okay, that's key, because somehow between 1750 and 1950, Switzerland managed to stay out of all these wars. So this will be key. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, there he is, a little older. This is just before he was deposed as king. And he was never he had a lot of respect for Mussolini and for Mussolini's right hand, but he really didn't know the chess game that was being played all around him. Now, he'd seen his father and his grandfather go through it, so he kind of knew how the game worked, but he especially didn't know about the tools of communication that were developed then. Remember, this is 1922, and radio is starting to become a very important tool for communication to the masses. And a lot of the nobility and the merchant class, especially in the south of Italy, they were being pushed. The marketing push to get radio into every home was very heavy. They really needed the big machine, the propaganda arm of what we call the usual suspects at Research Roadshow. The propaganda arm needed to have the radio in every household so they could get their message out. So what happened to Vittorio Emanuele II? We'll get to him later. So he went to, again, he had difficulty in trusting his advisors, knowing which one had more weight, had more knowledge of the overall situation, and whether or not this route that Mussolini's black shirts wanted to go in was the right one. And here's one key point. At any time, he could have consulted the not necessarily the working class, but the people who were not the usual nobility, and asked them how things were going, and what they thought, what were the real obstacles to economic prosperity. Mm-hmm. So, but he never did, and he kept trying to, the newspapers did that. He got a lot of his information from newspapers, but we know that newspapers in any language can be controlled. A lot depends on who the editors are and where did the editors go to school. Did some of the editors go to school in Vienna, or in certain parts of Venice? This is always very tricky. Now, I know a lot of you are asking, John, I've got a lot to get done tonight. Get to the point. The history does not repeat itself, but it rhymes. Most of you have heard that expression before. We're in a situation where there are people who are capable of leading this country and other countries in the West out of the current predicament, but they don't know where to get their information, and they're not hearing from the people affected most by the decisions that are being made. And this became very evident during COVID. The decision makers at the top, except for the few that were, who are really nasty, the majority of the people taking decisions on a day-to-day basis at the county level, state level, provincial level, they didn't know how the chessboard works, and there was no real form. There's no way to communicate with businessmen, businesswomen around the country or in their territory, and to come up with a cohesive plan. Because the propaganda is so effective at dividing and conquering people, everyone thinks that he or she knows how things work. And okay, we need a higher tax over here and a lower tax over there. And the central point I'm trying to make is we have to get better quickly at presenting local leaders, especially in the big cities, with being attacked by ICLEI and World Economic Forum, and other outside agencies, non-US, or at least outside of your state. We have to get better at communicating to our civic leaders how they can resist the sweet fruits being dangled in front of them by the globalists. We have to resist I know a lot of you are on Twitter, and you love your Twitter account, and many of you would find it very hard to do the good work you're doing without the Twitter account. But Twitter is more useful to the powers that be than it is useful to us. That is, that if they wouldn't have developed Twitter, and they certainly wouldn't let us continue to use it if it were hurting them more than it helps them. So we have to find ways of communicating with our civic leaders. Vittorio Emanuele II had every chance. He had multiple chances during the Second War, the early stages of the Second War, to cut ties with Germany and to side with the Allies. In fact, a couple of his advisors said that in October of 41, or no, October 42. In October 42, they said, you've got to. Mussolini is drinking too much. He's snorting coke. He's doing all kinds of different things. he's not capable of. He hasn't had a major victory yet. You've got to get rid of Mussolini and put someone else in charge, or side with the you throw it on the white flag and you give the Allies at least a partial victory. But he never had sufficient information to give him the courage to take that step. And that's the problem that we still have today. The newspapers are controlled. The much of the internet is controlled in the way that everyone is divided. We even have firemen here in Atlanta from one district arguing with firemen in another district because the situation is so chaotic. So we have to get better at solving that problem of communicating between each other and with our civic leaders as to the options that are available to them and how they can resist the whispering in the ear of by the World Economic Forum. Okay, let's go to the next slide. I'm sorry I didn't put this up yet. Hi, everybody. Yes, I did have a short power droop in the household power, so the internet went out for a few minutes. Sorry about that. I want to go back to Vittorio Emanuele III and what they were trying to do to him, to the figure of the king, as a and to tear down the economic, the image of economic prosperity under a king. While the war is going on, the newspapers are constantly trying to make the king look like he's responsible for everything bad that happens, and Mussolini is responsible for everything good that happens. And it's very subtle. It's not easy to see until well after the war, and a lot of other information comes out. Then going back and reading through the newspapers, like Turin's La Stampa, can you see that? Oh yeah, they're very. It's very fine, very sophisticated the way they're making Mussolini look good, and not all the time, but as the leader of the black shirts, they kind of have to make Mussolini look good, but always making the king look like he's responsible for certain bombing campaigns. The king should have saw that the bombs were coming on a certain day, or the king should have seen that when Rome was going to be bombed. So they don't criticize Mussolini, and the king always had a very difficult time criticizing Mussolini face to face. Let's bring up Wikipedia. Although Wikipedia is, like the great Mark Kulak often says, Wikipedia lies by omission. There's a lot that you don't get from the Wikipedia article. Okay, so between October of 1942 and September of 1943, the attacks get heavier and heavier. They're again division of each demographic. They're dividing and conquering every demographic in every province as not contributing enough to the war effort. Your group is not doing its part. The lower classes are being cowards. So the class division is accentuated. War is hell. War is literally hell. You don't know who your friends are, and the newspapers don't make it any easier. So there is constant. Oh, I'm sorry. I have this in Italian. Let's see. Oh, we're in luck. Wikipedia still has a few copies of things in English. Not like many of our biology PhDs in Boston. Their Italian, French, and Spanish pages are gone. Okay, back to Vittorio Emanuele. So my point here is that between 1942 and 1943, roughly, it's intense. The attack of the newspapers and the radio to make the king look bad are very intense, so that by the end of the war, the Allies come in, they liberate Italy, but then the transition back to some kind of normalcy is very difficult. And finally, the king in, I think it was in July of 1946, he has to abdicate the throne. Let's jump to that right now. He has to abdicate the throne. I take that back. For 33 days, his son becomes king. And finally, the people say, no, that's not good enough. Too little, too late. We're done with kings and queens and princes. We want what's been promised to us, that if we go to a republic, things will go much better. Where have I heard that before? So there's a referendum, and the people decide, yeah, we got to get rid of these kings and queens that we're kind of fed up with them. After 1,000 years, we think that we'll do much better with a republic. But look at the United States. They have a republic, and things are going great for them. And due to the liberation, of course, when the GIs came into various towns in Italy, they talk about how wonderful America is, and justly so. Things were going much better in America, but the press and the radio continued to push this idea that a republic is better because the kings don't know what they're doing. There's inbreeding and the usual brouhaha over nobility. But things did not go much better after. Well, I take that back. Between the king stepping down in, I think, August of 46, somewhere around there, and 1970, there was an economic boom. We had the Marshall Plan, we had various aid from Europeans that were not affected by the war. Switzerland did a lot, and they rebuilt a lot of buildings that had been destroyed in the time. A lot of factories had been rebuilt, and we had what was called the Italian miracle. Okay, the GDP per person more than doubled over what it was before the war, and things were, people thought that life is better. Now we had a lot of household, air conditioning and washing machines. My grandmother still remembers the first time she got to own a washing machine. She thought that was great, right? After 80 years of washing dishes. But there was a downside. There was a downside to all this. That a king or noblemen in general want the prosperity of their kingdom or dukedom. Why? They have a vested interest in it. Okay, it's kind of like the owner or general manager of a factory. They have a general interest, a inherent interest in the productivity of that region, of that entity. You didn't see Vittorio Emanuele out there in the dishing out soup in the poorhouses. But he did want the general prosperity of Italy. Okay, he wanted that. By going to a republic, we had the problem that we're having now in Washington. You have outsiders coming in and kibitzing and pushing, for example, the lobbyists. I think it was, it might have been Christian. I forget who told me, but someone told me that $250 million were spent by Big Pharma on Capitol Hill lobbyists. That is a lot of money in the pockets of a very few people. And that is basically the lobbyists who wrote many of our laws, like the 1986 Act that gave Big Pharma immunity from any kind of harm they caused through their vaccines. The people elected short term, well, it's supposed to be short term. People who are elected to go to Washington and represent us normally have 6 to 8 and 10 years, basically, in which they are to forward or fight for the prosperity of their state or their district back home. The king has a much longer vision, okay, or the prince or the duke. They have a 50-year vision for the prosperity of their region. Not the elected representatives. I'm not saying that a monarchy is better than a republic, and that's above my pay grade. What I am saying is that there were powers at work in Europe after the Second War that wanted to get rid of all monarchies to install the republics, because then in the republic, you can put in power someone who's been compromised much easier, in a much easier fashion. Okay, someone, and we have very many cases during the late 1950s and early 1960s where people like this guy here. He was the ambassador from the United States to Italy during the end of the war, and I think up until 1950. His last name is Phillips. Where did I put his picture? Sorry about this, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. I can't remember his first name. His last name is Phillips, and I'm trying very hard to find information about his family because he took some very bad decisions. He gave some very bad advice to the king, Vittorio Emanuele, prior to the end of the war, and he gave some. After the war, he was no friend of the prime minister or the council of ministers. It's very odd that he was a person selected. He was a eugenicist. So why does a eugenicist get put in power as ambassador to a country that's just, whose population has suffered under the war? They're economically destroyed. They're in a position of weakness. Why would you put a eugenicist in that place in Rome? Okay, I'm gonna try and wrap it up. What I'm getting at here is that, like I said before, history doesn't repeat itself; it rhymes. The propaganda is always there, always surrounding decision makers, no matter what form of government you have. We are in a very particular situation right now in the United States. If you tuned in to hear the missing link yesterday, where Jesse interviewed Judith Very Baker, it was eye-opening, even for me, that I've been studying this material for over 20 years. It was eye-opening to me how much information she had, Judith Very Baker, that Americans should have known at every step of the game. There were things back in 1966 regarding the virus vaccine game that would have been bombshell if she had been able to communicate it to well-meaning people in the state capitals and in Washington. But she was never allowed to get her word out, to get her message out. So that is, and I wonder if it's any easier now, 60 years later. The powers that be in Italy in 1960 were not necessarily on the side of the little people. Now in America, almost everyone has the internet available to them. For now, the internet is basically free. My best friend, who's in the information technology sector, thinks that in just a couple of years, we're going to start paying 2 cents for every email, and then 4 cents, and then 6 cents. But for now, the internet is relatively free. Yes, there are some sites where you have to pay $3 a month. I know that. But basically, the majority of information, actionable information out there, is pretty much free. We have to capitalize on that for what it's worth. We have to do what we can to do like the biomancer is doing out in Arizona, gathering as much information, especially from old books written before 1953, get as much information as possible, collate, assimilate the information, and get it out there in the form of 4-page, 6-page pamphlets that the average voter can read, understand, and take action upon. It is so very important right now that we do that, to not have history repeat itself. Okay, there's Macomb with Kennedy. I can't find that, the video, the window that I was looking for. All right. Here's Georgia Maloney. She didn't actually say this, okay? This is a meme that I made, but her actual quote wasn't far from it, okay? Here she's talking, holding up a picture of a suffering little kid, saying that she's trying to use the image of a poor kid who's been through hell to gain support for her program, the program that she's promoting heavily in the parliament. And I made a meme out of this saying, the solution is to liberate these kids from the chains of the wealthiest 0.8% of Swiss philanthropists. I forgot to put between quotes, philanthropists. We must demolish these effing hedge fund managers, except the ones that back the men who pulled me onto this freaking treadmill. I'm just sorry to disappoint those who think that Georgia Maloney is going to completely turn Europe over and everything will be roses and milk and honey. It's not going to happen. Georgia Maloney is just our version of Barack Obama. Anyway, so we're at a unique point in history. I've already said that 4 times. We have to use Christmas, take advantage of the opportunities that will present themselves at the various holiday gatherings to talk about the difficult topics, the topics that will make people upset because you think you know more than they do, because you have a history or your family has a history of leaning in a certain direction. Remember, in Europe, even back in 1922, there were no GOP, there was no Democrats. There might have been 10 other parties, but there were no Democrats and no Republicans. The greatest social construction, let me put this another way. The social engineers were already very good at what they do back in 1922. They've only gotten better with the use of the computer. The reason they gave us the internet was to enable the more sophisticated divide and conquer techniques that the internet allows. The social engineering, what was I going to say? Oh yeah, the greatest form of social construction is not what was I going to call it? The choice of gender. Okay, the greatest social construction is the Democrat, the Reds and the Blues, the what would you call it? The Hegelian dialect. You can't have the best way to confront Christmas dinner, arguments with your colleagues and friends at the Christmas party, is to point out that Europe is a basket case, and they never had any Democrats or any Republicans. Political parties do not cause things to happen. People who control the media cause things to happen, right? It's kind of like back in my aerospace days at the Air Force Base, we'd say that experimental aircraft don't kill test pilots. Marketing people kill test pilots. If you're really good at marketing, you can make fairly smart people do really stupid things. So going back to the Atlanta City Council, not the Atlanta Council, we'll cover them Friday. The Atlanta City Council and other city councils in the United States, there are good people who are making bad decisions because they are not getting accurate, actionable information in a timely manner. They're always getting the information a few weeks too late. So we have to, especially the Ospreys, we have to be much better at collating, gathering information from raw sources, hopefully prior to 1950, and getting that information into a useful form that a civic leader can utilize and not wind up like Vittorio Emanuele III. Thank you very much for your patience. I'm sorry for all the technical difficulties. It's been a very hectic week. Tune in again tomorrow we have a Zoom call tomorrow at 9 p.m. To talk about the Eugene Yu case and a couple of associated topics. And on Friday, are going to have another broadcast dealing with the current European situation and their ties to the new Silicon Valley, their ties to the Eugene Yu case in Los Angeles and their partners in Boston and New York and Chicago. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. I'll see you tomorrow. E perché non suona? Che diavolo?